Like the kind of the doghouse.
Okay, due to being on holiday, I initially missed the Israel Adesanya versus Sean Strickland fight. And because the Wi-Fi wasn't great, couldn't get anything, no stream, nothing. So I decided, you know what? It's a big fight, but it's not a crazy big fight. Let me see what happens in the morning. Let me just see. I then wake up, and to my surprise, I see that Sean Strickland has beaten Israel Adesanya. And from what I hear, the perception is that it was overwhelming. So I recently just got done watching the fight, and I gotta say, that was one of the most impressive performances I had seen from a contender coming in to fight a long-reigning champion. I remember, I think the last time I was that impressed was when Kamaru Usman fought Tyron Woodley and just overwhelmed him and dominated him. But what Strickland done was shocking. Now, I'm gonna read what I put on Twitter the day of the fight, because I really didn't see a way how Strickland was going to win this. I felt he was too basic and didn't have enough there to really trouble Adesanya. But I'm going to tell you what I put, and I quote, "Gone through all the scenarios in my head, and I genuinely don't know how Strickland gets it done. Unless Izzy has an off night and Shaw can keep the pressure on, I think it's pretty likely that this will turn out like all of Izzy's other title defenses." Now, this is something I meant, and I felt as if that it really didn't seem to me that Strickland had much stylistically to beat Adesanya, but I did underestimate how quickly Strickland could improve. And one thing I did sort of overlook was him obviously training with Alex Pereira, which in reality shouldn't be that much of a difference, because as good as Pereira is, you know, he's only one man and doesn't speak any English pretty much, so I don't see how much he could learn. But Strickland, maybe he's a very fast learner and seemingly is a very good learner and very coachable, because he really, I don't want to say he exposed Adesanya, but he essentially has done what I always felt as if the likes of Paulo Costa, the likes of maybe like a Jared Cannonier should have done to Adesanya. I'll go back here. When Paulo Costa first fought Adesanya, I actually picked Costa to win. And the reason I did this, one, I had that stupid thing that we all have of an inkling that maybe he might land something. And also, I saw in the Romero fight that Adesanya didn't like pressure. I know everybody goes at Romero for that fight, and so a lot of people went at Izzy as well, don't get me wrong. But I always said I felt the blame was more like 70-30 on Romero. And the reason being is obviously Adesanya's the champion. He doesn't need to engage. But if you look at Adesanya, the first thing he does in that fight is back off and circles around. When Romero's standing there doing nothing, Adesanya's not jabbing, not leg kicking. He's pretty much just waiting and waiting and waiting. And it got me thinking, if you get a guy who really puts the pressure on, and that's why I put in the tweet, if Sean can put the pressure on Adesanya, then he can really cause him trouble. But I always thought that was just one thing about Adesanya, where he's never fought a guy who really stuck it on him and really put the pressure on. Pereira did a little bit in the second MMA fight, but still wasn't like it was constant in your face, like a Kobe Covington up in your face, unable to do anything about it. And the one thing I'd say, when I saw the result, I figured, a lot of people said that Izzy looked slow, had an off night. So I figured it must be just Adesanya didn't look at the races. Now watching the fight, I'm telling you straight, that's a lie. Adesanya looked the same way he has looked in every single one of his title defenses. He looked the same against Pereira, same against Cannonier, Vittori, same against Whitaker. You could go through all of them. He looked the same. The difference here was a stylistic matchup. Now, there's three things that Sean Strickland did brilliant, and I'm going to go through why I think he won the fight. So the first one was the Philly shell. The Philly shell is obviously it's a classic boxing guard where you essentially, hard to say just from my voice to explain what it is, but to those who obviously know boxing, we all know what it is. You know, you're covering your head and body, but it's not really something that's worked a lot in MMA. It's something that Floyd is famous for, and it's something that in boxing it's sort of the perfect perfect defense if you can utilize it properly. You know, nowadays you see a few guys using it here and there. A lot of guys use the shoulder roll as well, but I will say it's not the easiest to master. However, in MMA, it's a difficult one simply because you are essentially, a lot of the things in boxing don't work because a lot of things in boxing work when you're more static. You can't do that in MMA. For example, you look at someone like Canelo Alvarez, has a very high guard. That wouldn't work all the time in MMA simply because you're susceptible to low kicks. And I believe the way Strickland kind of used it, kind of went in and out. It was such an intriguing fight stylistically. The Philly shell makes it impossible for you to hit. And what Strickland does is he doesn't have his hands up to his, has a high guard covering his face. What he does, he kind of leaves his hands out and almost uses a Philly shell in a bit of a varied way. And I think what this does, first of all, he parries a lot of punches, so you're rarely able to hit him. And because it's quite awkward and his hands are almost in front of you, but you can't really hit him, you really have to be sneaky with a lot of your attacks to hit. That's why with Strickland, he rarely ever gets completely beat up in fights. Really, if you be honest. The Pereira fight, he got hit. The reason he got hit is because Pereira is stylistically found the answer. Not found the answer. Stylistically, it was a perfect clash for Pereira because what Strickland does, he parries the punches out on his face and doesn't. And he. The problem is when you have a guy who's explosive and powerful like Pereira, what he simply did was just faked it and went around the guard with a vicious left hook. And that's the one way you can get Strickland is with the hooks. But the problem is the Philly shell cancels this out. And because Strickland stands so straight up, he almost sees everything that you're getting at him. And that's sort of my second point I want to make. His the way he stood straight up Strickland. There's a lot of guys who kind of crouch down, have that sort of style. Cannonier has the style of crouching down. That's why Izzy was able to beat him up quite easily. Vittori doesn't crouch down completely, but he does sort of have a more of a but like a more of a hunched way of his stance. One thing about Strickland, he stands straight up. Now what that does is it allows you to see all the kicks coming. Now we know Adesanya's sort of calling card is those leg kicks. He could barely land any on Strickland. Reason being, Strickland saw all of them. He checked quite a few. He got out of the way of a lot. And that teep kick, that front teep kick was so beautiful by just keeping the distance. Adesanya couldn't let any kind of offense go. And the reason for that is because Strickland just saw everything. Adesanya completely shut out. And this is why I say, it's not that Adesanya looked bad, it's Strickland looked that good. Put the Adesanya against Robert Whittaker, whatever you think is the best version of Israel Adesanya, the Paulo Costa one, the same thing happens. It's not to do with the Adesanya falling asleep, it's to do with the stylistic matchup. Strickland really fought a beautiful fight, and that is one thing that I think with Strickland, because he's quite a awkward fighter, he can look a little bit cumbersome at times, but I think it's a little bit harsh because he does have a lot of things. His boxing is very crisp, as we saw. The jab was beautiful in the face of Adesanya, and one thing about Strickland as well is he's physically not crazy muscular wise, but he's also not really that fat. He's kind of got just a I don't know, the perfect physique, I'd say, for stamina. Doesn't tire. He's always in front of you, and I think when you look at how awkward he can be, his grappling's not that bad either. He's definitely got he's not going to be middleweight champion for 10 years, I don't think, but what he will be is for guys like Adesanya, who's a hard fight, and I do think that, I don't know what they're going to do next, but I think it's a hard fight for Adesanya. He's really got to figure this one out. This wasn't like Pereira. Pereira was losing the fight and caught Adesanya in the 5th round and just wailed on him until he got the stoppage. Adesanya can kind of be like, well, I was doing alright, the stoppage wasn't good, this and that. He got picked apart in this fight with ease. This wasn't even close, and I think the Philly shell really caused him problems because Adesanya couldn't land anything. Strickland saw everything. Strickland standing up straight means that he can see all the kicks, because when you're obviously crouched down, you're using a lot of, not of energy, but you're kind of focusing on crouching down. You're not stood up and you can't see everything clearly. And this is the thing. Your mind is almost, it can't compartmentalize both things naturally. Stood straight up, you can see everything in front of you. You can see all the punches, the kicks. And because Strickland's got a very, very awkward defense, he can kind of see everything whilst also blocking everything that you're throwing at him. It's intriguing. For Adesanya, who fights quite long and likes to pick off his opponents, I felt as if Strickland was just landing the clean shots, and landing a lot of beautiful boxing combinations, whilst Adesanya was trying to be flashy, trying to set the traps. But just Strickland said he felt like he's fighting amateur, and I think that's the reason being is that Adesanya tried to do to him what he did to everybody else. But the problem is, it's not that he couldn't fall into the traps, it's that he kind of made it possible for them traps to even come about. And I do think that this is just a beautiful performance from Strickland. And the third thing that I want to say, what he did, is the pressure. He did not give this guy a moment to breathe. Adesanya was on his heels for 5 rounds. He was tired at the end of that fight. Mentally and physically, it's tiring going backwards all the time in a fight. And I think Adesanya just could not cope at all. And I think Strickland was just on him constantly. And this is the thing. There are some guys, Vittori, Costa here and there, Pereira, who kind of pressured Adesanya, but they'd pressure him. Adesanya would hit them and they would almost back up, go into the middle range, and then the fight would sort of play out from there. With Pereira, and this is another reason with Pereira as well, his kickboxing is very good, obviously, Pereira, but because he also stands straight up, you saw Adesanya couldn't really land the leg kicks on him either. So I think this is a big thing. And against those guys who kind of stand straight up, he's not really having the success, I think, Adesanya, that you would think he'd have. But yeah, I think the pressure really made it horrible for him. And when you consider this guy was following him all night long, coupled with the fact that Adesanya just couldn't touch him, this is going to be a hard one for Israel Adesanya, because it's not as if he just got knocked out. He almost did get knocked out, obviously, in the second round, or no, first round even, and had his whole head rocked back. But it felt as if that would have been better if you got stopped then, because some fighters, they don't come back from when they're getting dominated. Woodley is an example of one. Tony Ferguson, another. Not saying Adesanya will end up like those guys. I think he's got a bit more of a fight IQ to be better than that. But I just think it's a very hard pill for Adesanya to take. And he can beat Strickland, but I think one thing I think Adesanya needs to do, he kind of looks for these big one shots, and he never really... He's a decent boxer, Adesanya, but he never really uses the combinations to the body. I think he should trust himself a bit more in the pocket, Adesanya, as well. I think your best chance of beating Strickland, I think, in this second fight, if you have one, is digging to the body more. I don't think the leg kicks, trying to pick him off in one shot, worked. He did land a few right hands, but Strickland ate them, and Strickland has a chin, so it shows, Pereira got knocked out with that right hand, but he got too reckless. Strickland never got reckless, and he won't get reckless if they fight again, because everybody knows the dangers that Adesanya does have, regardless of if people want to call him boring or whatever. But yeah, crazy sport that this MMA game is, and I was so shocked. But hell, there is no one I would love to be champion more than Sean Strickland, because this guy, to say he's a character would be an understatement. I think he's one of the best personalities in the sport. I think he's excellent to listen to. Says a lot of stuff that doesn't really make sense and kind of confuses me, but it's what I like about him. I think he's a real character and had a real rough upbringing, so I was so happy for him. And that moment in the 5th round when he's screaming and shouting at Adesanya and talking all this because he knows he's about to be champion, It's one of the best moments in the UFC history, in my opinion. And I love the fact that this is the guy who's a champion now. To me, this is MMA. Guys who work hard and really put it all. Like the fact that this guy got knocked out by Alex Pereira and still had the almost lack of ego to almost go and train with this guy. That shows a lot. And I think this guy is, maybe skill-wise, he may not be a champion for a long time, but he's definitely worthy of that belt. He put in a performance that Vettori, Cannonier, Costa, Robert Whittaker, even Pereira in the last fight weren't able to do, because he outstruck and outclassed Israel Adesanya for 5 rounds. I never thought I'd say that, but here we are. Sean Strickland, middleweight champion of the world. I don't know what kind of simulation we're living in, but yeah, until next time.